Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today on 420 we are going to be talking about the Nightspinner, because you'd have to be high to think this thing is good. In the recent balanced data slate in January, it went from 180 points to 210 points, which is pretty significant, and it also had its ability nerfed as well, making it one of the, if not the most expensive indirect fire unit in the entire game. And realistically, you can get a lot of Eldar for that amount of points. So the question becomes, will the Nightspinner actually make a comeback? Is it possible? Well, I actually do think that because of the recent reveals of the Ork Codex, we might be seeing a slight return of the Nightspinner within the next month. And the reason I say this is because this thing is pretty much a hard counter to Orks, even before the Codex came out, and now since the release of the Codex, we're starting to see the rules and stuff and how they interact. It seems like to me that the Nightspinner is just as powerful, if not more so, against the Ork Green Tide and the Green Menace in general. So, having said that, let's go ahead and dive right into the video. First, we're going to be doing a quick review of its stats, weapons, and special rules. We're going to be looking at its strengths and weaknesses, the combos and synergies that the Nightspinner has. We're going to be talking about the new Ork Codex and where the Nightspinner fits in. And lastly, the role of the Nightspinner in an Eldar army and how to make the most out of it. So starting with its stats, it's just an average grav tank, movement 14, toughness 9, 3+ save, OC 3. I think one of the reasons why a lot of people got turned off from the Nightspinner is because if you compare it to other indirect fire units from other armies, its profile is worse, if not the exact same, at a much higher cost. The extra movement and, of course, being a grav tank, having flying stuff, doesn't really do a lot for the Nightspinner as an indirect fire tool. As for the weapons on the Nightspinner, the Doomweaver is a pretty unique indirect fire weapon with twin linked and devastating wounds. On average, you should get about 2 devastating wound procs if you do the twin linked ability, reroll everything that's not a 6, for example, which will probably amount to a few Space Marines dead or, 4 wounds chunked out of a hard target. However, this profile is a little bit deceptive. It does look like it's very strong, just, based on all the special rules it has, but it's really not. It doesn't really kill a lot. And, you do pay a lot of points for this thing, and especially since the nerfs, it seems like it's a lot worse than other indirect fire options from other armies. It can also take an underslung shuriken cannon, which is effective against marine equivalents. And if you want to go for some maybe occasional secondary objective scoring, you can take the shuriken catapult as well, but it will be more rarely used. As far as its melee options go, it does have the standard Wraithbone hull, which is decent for tank shock, but not much else. You're probably not going to want this thing in close combat. As far as its abilities go, it does have the monofilament web. A unit shot by the Doomweaver is at -2 movement, advances, and charges. So that means if a unit advances, not only is its movement characteristic reduced by 2, but its advance roll is reduced by 2 as well, effectively reducing movement by 4 when a target advances. In addition to this, it also gets -2 to charges for that unit. So, this ability was basically nerfed to, instead of preventing advances, just do a -2 to advances and charges. This is situationally better, but only against units that want to be in close combat. So it's not particularly effective against everything out there. Shooting units are not really going to care much about this, but melee units will, especially those that can advance and charge. So this ability is still very good at controlling movement. The problem lies in the Nightspinner's cost and, the units that it is going to be effective against. As far as its war gear options go, it can take a shuriken cannon instead of the shuriken catapult if it wants to. I mean, realistically, you're not going to be using either option very much as an indirect fire platform, but, it's there for you if you need it. It does suffer a -1 to hit when under 4 wounds as well, so it can get damaged, although again, if it's damaged as badly, it's probably just going to be dead. Now, as I've stated a couple times earlier in this video, it does cost 210 points, which is probably not what it should cost, and I think the ability nerf was probably enough. There's a lot of other vehicles, indirect fire vehicles in the game, like the Manticore and the Exorcist, which are arguably much better than the Nightspinner, and they're less points. And with the other nerfs that the Eldar took in January, I just don't think the points nerf was warranted in hindsight. But, there we go. It's 210 points, making it, again, one of the most expensive indirect fire pieces in the entire game. As far as its keywords go, it does have the fly keyword, making movement awkward at times, but, luckily this thing doesn't really want to move that much, so it's not that big of an issue. As far as its strengths and weaknesses go, it can still severely hamper a unit's movement and charges, especially if a unit is combat-oriented. It's going to be at basically -6 to its movement value. Twin-linked and devastating wounds also allows for guaranteed damage, so if you really need 2 wounds on something extremely badly, then the Nightspinner can do it pretty effectively. However, its weaknesses are that it is extremely expensive and it's fragile and has low damage overall. Having AP 0 means that anything that's not a devastating wound is probably not going to kill anything. And that is a little bit of a shame, especially when you compare the damage to other indirect fire units like, for example, the Manticore, the Basilisk, or the Exorcist, or even Plague Burst Crawlers. As far as its combos and synergies go, Guide makes it hit more reliably, so if you do have a Guide to toss on it on the first turn of the game, it is useful to have to make sure you hit as much as possible. Doom also increases its ability to wound a bit. It does have Strength 7, which is kind of a lame profile to have. Strength 7 is not really that great on a ranged weapon, especially when you're shooting a Marine, so Doom does help it wound a little bit better. Although realistically, the opponent is still going to get a 3+ armor save, so it's arguably not even worth it. The ability pairs great with Warlocks, though. And the reason why is because of the restrain ability on Warlocks for a -4 to charge overall. So if you're running a unit of Storm Guardians with a Warlock or something like that, you get that 6-inch auto advance the first turn, and then maybe the second turn, you throw this on a unit that's going to charge them. And then they're going to be at -4 to charges, which is pretty significant. It means that a lot of units outside of, maybe 6 inches are really not going to be able to charge you. At least effectively, that is. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the new Ork Codex and where the Nightspinner fits in here. So with the new Ork Codex, we're seeing an absolutely insane amount of good, solid detachment bonuses. The 2 that stand out to me are the Green Tide and the Bully Boys. With the Bully Boys, you get 2 turns of Wah, which means double advance and charge, and of course the 5+ invul save carries over. And of course, the Nightspinner having devastating wounds means that, no armor saves, no invul saves. They'll probably still get to feel no pain, but it also has damage too. So if you're shooting against knobs and stuff like that, you're going to be doing more damage anyway. The Big Mech can move through models and terrain features, so, your typical screening strats against Orks are not going to work as well, because I'm sure that some Ork players are going to be taking this model. It's extremely good, and it's a new model. So kind of a double reason to take it. If something is new and good, you can be certain that it's going to be in people's armies. The Weird Boy has a teleport. It had this before, but it wasn't used as much because now we have strats that allow you to get bonuses with charges. So Orks have a lot of +2 to their charge, distance, or, in some cases with the Green Tide, plus however many the battle round is. So if your battle round is 4, they're getting +4 for, their stratagem. Which is actually just insane, right? I mean, this is kind of unheard of, and this is, something that I've been thinking about during the last couple of days. It's going to be really hard to screen out something that can teleport and then get a +4 to its charge distance, even if you do have to be outside of 9. So either our screening is going to have to be really on point throughout the whole game, or you're going to have a tool like this to at least knock off a couple of inches on that charge and make it harder for the Orks to fully get into combat. And, just in general, I think the Nightspinner is really good against Orks, even better than it was prior to the nerfs. I know that seems weird, but the reason why is because Orks love to charge in, right? They're combat oriented, so that means that not only you're getting the bonus of the move and the advance, because Orks will be advancing due to their wall and still be able to charge, but you are also knocking 2 inches off their charge distance. And yes, Orks do have stratagems that give them bonuses to charges, but if you're making the Ork player spend command points on that every turn, that's pretty worth it in my opinion, especially if you have the correct amount of screens set up and so forth. Now, just as a side note, when I get a fuller grasp of what the Ork Codex can do, I am going to make a video on how to defeat Orks, because I think they're going to be probably one of the meta-defining armies coming forward. Green Tide looks especially nasty. Bully Boys also looks really good. They both look very strong. So I am going to be doing a video on how to tackle them. I think in most of the same ways, Orks are Orks are Orks, right? They're going to be, beat in the same ways that they always are. But we do have to be more careful because they have a lot more tools available to them that can get around those typical strategies. So I'm hoping to have a video out probably within the next couple weeks on that. I'm hoping to get a couple of, games against Orks. There's a couple of local Ork players that, aren't technically in my local group, but I'm sure if I reach out, they'll be more than happy to play a game. So what is the role that the Nightspinner plays in an Eldar army, and how do you make the most out of it? So I think that, ultimately the Nightspinner continues to be a board control piece that can slow units considerably, even though it comes at a very hefty price, right? 210 points is a lot to pay for something like this, but it does do a good job at its role, especially against combat units that want to charge in, because they're going to also have to suffer the -2 to charge. So beforehand, you were essentially negating about 5.5 inches of movement on average against a unit that wanted to charge you, and now you're negating a straight flat 6, which is really, quite powerful. And against the new Ork Codex, it seems to have hit its niche, being able to prevent charges and movement effectively while dealing decent damage to units who will most likely have a feel no pain. So this is another thing I want to mention, is that this thing does have blast. So against big Green Tide units, it's going to be fairly effective at killing them. You're most likely going to see Pain Boys attached to Ork Boy units, which will give them a 5+ feel no pain. But the Nightspinner being damage 2 kind of eats through that a little bit, and you are getting devastating wounds, so that 5+ invul save that the Ork Boys have will be a little bit less effective. It's also strength 7, so that toughness 5 of the Orks is not going to be a problem. So when you consider this thing, over the course of a 5-turn game, if you are able to keep it alive and, screen properly where you can, and also, with the help of this thing, keep the Orks out of your backline, then it can rack up some serious damage. And in a pinch, in the late game that is, it can be used to screen effectively as well, even against the Big Mech, which can normally move through enemy units. Now, the reason I say this is because the Grav Tank platform is actually quite deep. If you measure it from, front to back, it is greater than 6 inches, counting engagement range. So if you have a choke point and you want to, plug that choke point with a Wave Serpent, a Falcon, or something like that, you can actually significantly block an Ork unit from being able to move through it, even if they have a Big Mech attached, which can move through enemy units, because they're just not going to be able to end their movement outside of 1 inch completely. And I know that's not how you want to use a 210 point unit, but maybe in the late game, if it comes up, it could possibly be game winning. So in conclusion, the Nightspinner, while still extremely expensive, does still have some useful applications against the right targets, especially combat-oriented units that want to not only advance, but also charge as well. So, units that are eligible to advance and charge in the same turn are going to be its best targets. With the Ork Codex on the horizon as well, I do feel like we are going to be seeing more of these showing up in competitive play, depending on how dominant the Orks become. So if the Orks aren't dominant, if the points end up being kind of high for, what they should be and so forth, then I don't think we'll see a lot of this thing, honestly. But if Orks are very competitive and we see them kind of rise to the top and be the cream of the crop, so to speak, of the Warhammer 40k factions in competitive play, then I definitely think we might see a few players running at least one Nightspinner to kind of offset that. Now, of course, this is a very meta-dependent call. I don't think that the Nightspinner is going to be anywhere close to that good in normal circumstances, but I do think that in some matchups, against Green Tide or Bully Boys and stuff like that, the Nightspinner can really come into its own, even at 210 points. And between you and me, guys, something I've really wanted to try out during the last week because of the Ork Codex has been the Storm Guardian and Nightspinner combo. Basically, the Warlock putting restraint on the unit and then having anything that wants to charge it and -4 to their distance. Now, obviously, this is something that's going to happen really quite frequently because Storm Guardians like to get into the midfield early. And I'm hoping that against Orks or kind of another combat-oriented army that this could be fun to pull off. Because a failed charge against Storm Guardians means a unit that's going to be left out in the open, ready to tear apart. And while I don't think this is the most competitive thing in the world, that combination, kind of hinges on a lot of things going right. I do think it's pretty fun and pretty hilarious. So it's something I'm looking forward to trying. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. A little bit of a short video and a little bit of an update. I actually had a video planned earlier this week, a couple days ago, but unfortunately the file got corrupted and I've had trouble, kind of getting it uncorrupted so that I can then, download it and, put it on YouTube. It was actually quite a long video covering, how to win tournaments as the Aeldari, but, hopefully that file gets fixed. If not, I'm going to have to redo the whole thing from scratch, and that'll probably take, another couple of days. So, again, I apologize for that. I know I haven't had a video out in the last couple of days or so, but I definitely wanted to still have a video out on 420 because, hey, 420 hype. And what better unit to cover on 420 than the Nightspinner, which, kind of probably reminds me most of a marijuana leaf, I'm not going to lie. Especially the Doomweaver. Like, if you look at the Doomweaver for long enough, it eventually starts to look like a marijuana leaf. So, there we go. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and thank you so much to all my patrons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last year and a half. Your help has greatly improved the channel and helped it grow significantly. If you do want to become a patron and help support the channel, I have free trials activated, which will grant you permanent access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar players and enthusiasts who like talking about strategies, tactics, and of course, hobbying. I will leave the link for that in the description below. I'm also an Amazon affiliate and have a channel store page, so if you want to grab some Eldar-inspired apparel on the channel store page, or, grab some discounted Eldar miniatures on Amazon, I will leave those links in the description also. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Let me know what you guys think about the Nightspinner in the comment section below. I personally think it's currently one of the, worst units in the index, but I think the Ork Codex might revive it a little bit so that it, kind of has a use and a role once more. All right, everybody, that's going to be it. I'll see you guys later. Have a good one. Peace out.